Hey there guys, and welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. Read these folders first of all. Second of all, instead of doing, what I've normally done, we're going to start something a little bit different. We're going to be learning how to code with processing or JavaScript. We're using processing 3 here. I have a download for it in the description. You can get it on both Windows and Mac, so it shouldn't really matter which platform you're on. So when you open it up, you'll have this get started thing. After you've downloaded it, you can just hit get started, and then you'll come to this page here, and this is your sketch page, and this is basically where you write all of the code. Now to go ahead and launch the code and run it, you're going to go ahead and click on this play button, which as you can see here, over here it says run, and then when you're done, you can either exit out of it, which will stop it, or you can hit the stop here and that'll exit out of it as well. So, in this video, we're going to learn some basic shapes and how to set it up. In future videos, I'll do more complex things like functions and variables, and we'll get into all of that stuff, animations, how to make games, those types of things. But to start, we need to go ahead and know what a function is, because there's two different types of functions that you're going to use when you're starting out. When you go on later, you can actually create your own functions, but these are the two you're going to want to start out with. And when you're defining a function, you always want to start with void. And that will get the code ready. It'll say, okay, this is going to be a function, and this first function here we're going to call setup. And this is basically how you do this is after this you're going to have these parentheses here, which will give the parameters. The parameters of this are basically things that you would use down here inside of these curly brackets, and your function goes in here. The main use for a function is something that's going to be run multiple times, and you're going to use it over and over and over. So this one doesn't require any parameters, but let's say we wanted to make like an X and a Y value, because then maybe we're making a button. We can define those here with just like X and Y, but we'll get into that later. For now, we're going to go ahead and do the setup. So what do we need when we're running our code? Well, first of all, we need a canvas to draw our code on. And to set the size of this canvas, we need to use the size function. And we can go ahead and do parentheses here and specify our width and our height. And these two values are separated by a comma. And we'll just start out with something simple like 500 by 500. Something to keep in mind with is that the canvas starts in the top left-hand corner. X increases as it goes right, and Y increases as it goes down, which is the opposite of your normal grid, where as you go down, Y decreases, but the X is the same, Y is just inverted. So that's our setup function there, and you always need to end everything, pretty much everything, with a semicolon. You can see here, we didn't end this function with a semicolon though. And that I might explain later, but anyways, the next function that we're going to use a lot is the draw function. And basically what this is it's the same thing as before. You just use void draw, opening parenthesis, closing parenthesis, and then two curly brackets here. And the draw function will basically run things over and over and over and over indefinitely. Now, something that is going to be very useful, moving on to the draw function onto actually drawing things, something that's going to be very useful is choosing a color. So how do we do that? Well, let's think of a shape. We want to fill it with a certain color, and therefore that's the command we're going to use here, not a command, function, fill, and then we'll open it with an opening parenthesis just like everything else. And this has 3 parameters. You're using a RGB, which is red, green, and blue. So the first parameter is going to be how much red, second how much green, and the third parameter is how much blue. And then of course we're going to close it off with a closing parenthesis and a semicolon. But in the middle here, we're going to have our 3 different sections. So let's say we want to make a red figure. We'll just do that. So we want all red, nothing else, no green, no blue, just red. So the maximum value we can have is 255. the least value that we can have is 0. If we had all of them set to 0, that would be the lack of any color, therefore make it black. And if we set them all to 255, that would be all color, which means white. Think of a prism. You take the rainbow and you put it into one, it comes out white. So, but we just want red, so we want all red. So the maximum amount of red we can have is 255. RGB, our first parameter is red, so we're going to put 255 in our first parameter. Then we don't want anything for the other two, so for the green and blue parameters, we'll just put 0. Now this will create a red shape. Well, we have to create the shape, but this will fill the shapes that we make red, and we can change this throughout the code. The first two shapes I'm going to teach you are rectangles and ellipses, which are basically circles and ovals. Rectangles are also squares, of course, if you want them to be. So let's say we want our square to be in the center of the canvas. And by that, I mean like right in the middle. So how can we do that? Well, first of all, let's think of how big we want this rectangle to be. And rectangle, the function for that is rect, rect, short for rectangle, and then of course we'll open this up. So we have our x, we have our y, we have our width, we have our height, and then there's other parameters that you can use, but those are more complicated. I'll get into those in another video. So our x is where we want it on the canvas. Remember that increases as we go right and decreases as we go left. And then we will have our y value here, which again increases as you go down and decreases as you go up, opposite of your standard graphs. And then we have the width of the rectangle and the height of the rectangle. So we want it to be a perfect square in the middle. So we need our width and our height to be the same. We'll just set it to about 200. Now we don't want to set it too big, like larger than the canvas, because then it will go off the canvas. Now we have to do a little bit of math. So the center of our canvas is at 250, 250, because of course it's 500 by 500. A couple of those in half, we get 250, 250. That's our center point. So we want our square to be around that point. But we can't just set the x and the y to 250 because the rectangle will start at the top left-hand point, which means we actually have to, okay, think of it this way. You have a square, right? You have a point in the middle, and then halfway to that point is going to be 100, and then the rest of it is the 200 that makes up the width. And the center point is 100 past that. So to go to the top left-hand corner, we have to go back 100. And it's the same thing with the y. We also have to go up 100. So if we think of it that way, we can figure out exactly where we need to go. We need to go up 100 and left 100 from our center point, which is at 250, 250, which means we're going to start it at 150, 150. And this will draw a red rectangle at 150, 150, and it's going to be 200 by 200 right in the middle of our screen. So if we click run, you think 500 by 500 is huge, it's really, really big, but in reality, you can see here 500 by 500 is only a small portion of your screen. And here is our red square, or rectangle, since they're the same thing. A rectangle is a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not necessarily a square. But in this case, they're both true. It's a rectangle and a square. So there's our red rectangle. Now then, let's talk about circles or ellipses. We can go ahead and click the X, or you can click this stop button, and it will go ahead and close out of that. There. Now, let's say we want to make a green circle, just to continue on with the fill stuff. So RGB. G is green. That's our second parameter, which means, assuming we want it all green, we're going to have no red, all green, so 255, and no blue. And again, we ended, all these are ended with a semicolon, as you can see here. Now then, we want to create an ellipse. This time we're going to type out the full thing. It's ellipse. And now then, it's pretty much the same as a rectangle. I mean, it's a little bit different because the x and the y values are kind of different from a rectangle. The x and the y value that you're going to type in here, it's x, y with height again. Now you're probably like, wait, ellipses don't have width and height. They have radius and diameter. Well, that's sort of what these are. These are the diameter for the width and the diameter for the height. And that enables you to create ovals and whatnot rather than just circles. So we have a x value here and a y value here. This is in the exact center of the circle rather than the top left-hand corner. like it is with a rectangle. So this is in the exact center. And assuming we want the circle to be in the middle of the screen, that means we want it to be at exactly 250 and 250. And that center point of the circle will be at the center point of our screen. Now then we want the width, the diameter width of the ellipse to basically be the same as the width of the rectangle. So how do we do that? Well, it's pretty easy. We can just type in 200. And then we can just type in 200 since we want it to be a perfect circle. Now clicking on run here. That's a colon, that's a semicolon. Clicking on run here, that will go ahead and open this up. And you can see here our circle is right in the middle of our square, and it's green just like we wanted it to. Now, one more thing before we go is you'll notice that the background, the space behind it is gray, and it's gray by default. But we can actually go ahead and change this with a cool command or a function called background. And again, it uses the same parameters as fill, RGB. So let's say we want a black background. Well, we don't want any color at all, so we want no red, no green, and no blue. And then, of course, we're going to close this off with a closing parenthesis and a semicolon. So this will make a black background. You always want to put this first because it's like putting a rectangle over everything else. Another thing to keep in mind is that the code will run from the top down. So if we have an ellipse last, like we do here, it will be on top of everything else. If it's at the bottom, it will be on top of everything else in the code. And we want to be able to see our shapes, so we want the background to go down first, then we draw our rectangle, and then we draw our ellipse on top of that rectangle. And order does matter. Order can be very, very, very important, and it's, a very, usually, when you get later into like animation and games and stuff, order really matters, and if you have the wrong order, that's a bug right there. So this right here should draw a black background, so the area behind the rectangle and the circle will be black, and as you can see here, that is exactly what happens. So that's perfect. Anyways, that's about it. Be sure to listen to the folders. The folders know all. Like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you all next time. Goodbye for now.